This is Propulsion, the financial professional's catalyst to exponential growth. Are you a driven and ambitious financial professional, but you are finding it hard to break through to the next level? Or are you struggling to build and run your practice successfully? Join Francois du Toit, a leading consultant and trainer, as he interviews not only the experts, but also people you have never heard of before, but who have done amazing things, about how they run their practices, the challenges they face, how they overcome those challenges, their failures, which tech has improved their business, how their revenue models work, and other practical aspects. We go deep so you can learn as much as possible. And here is your host, Francois du Toit.
He joined Old Mutual Personal Financial Advice in 2011 at the age of 24. He completed several qualifications since 2012 and in 2015 became CFP certified. Thereafter, he completed the Advanced Postgraduate Diploma with distinction and was recognized by the University of the Free State Faculty of Law as the top student for asset management and investment planning. In 2018, their practice was ranked as one of the top 10 practices in South Africa by Old Mutual, and he made the top 5 in the Financial Planning Institute's Financial Planner of the Year competition in 2018. All the way from Kimberley in the Northern Cape, Henry Legrandsie, welcome to Propulsion.
Thanks for having me, Francois. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy. We were supposed to do this some time ago, and then thanks to some cyclones and all funny stuff in Mozambique, it didn't happen. But I'm very happy to have you here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad that the cyclone hit rather before than after we arrived in Mozambique.
No, I agree. That's the timing for that was perfect, although it wasn't perfect. It worked out well. Henry, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. And I know you're here in Joburg for a couple of days. So thank you for making the time and for driving all the way to Krugersdorp. You know, at least it's also a case you can feel sort of at home, I guess, being from Kimberley and all. The reason I wanted to talk to you is we met about a year ago, if I remember correctly. I think last year in January when I was in Kimberley to talk to you about Xplan and all the new stuff that was implemented at Old Mutual. And that's where we met for the first time. And I can't believe it's been already more than a year. That's how quickly time goes. But after chatting to you, I mean, we were there for 2 days. I don't know if you remember. But we were there for 2 days and we got to talk a little bit. And just the way that you were talking about what you were doing and what you're doing in your practice, it was really, really interesting to me. And we kept contact. And when I started Propulsion, I thought, like, you are definitely one of the guys that I want to talk to. And then also being one of the top 5 in the FPI Financial Plan of the Year competition, I think that sort of confirmed my feelings and what I was hearing from what you were doing. So why do I want to talk to you? I want to talk to you about, how you are structuring your business, how you're running it. You are with Old Mutual in personal financial advice, so PFA as it's called for short, and you are building a general practice there, if I'm not mistaken. I think I would want to start there. It's just how does that work within a setup like within Old Mutual, because PFA, that is tied. So it is in Old Mutual itself. It's not a franchise. How does that work? And tell us a bit more about the practice.
Our team consists of myself and 4 other advisors, 2 of which are partners in the business, and we have 3 support staff. The business is a bit odd in the sense that it functions as a unit and not individuals. So it means that all the advisors in the business works towards getting income for the business, and the income is distributed between the advisors regardless of who brings in what business. We did this to remove the conflict of advice between advisors when dealing with clients, so that we rather create a uniform process in the practice, and the client is married to the process and the practice rather than to a certain advisor. That's why I can be here today, because I know the practice is still running and the other people in my team is still engaging with my clients.
It sort of leads on to what Arno Burger said in his episode as well, where he said they are intentionally building Fidius as the business and not Arno Burger as the business. And it's sort of the same you're doing. You've got this practice, And you want people to do business with the practice and know that whether it's Henry or whoever else is in that business, that it's the business taking care of them. And as you said, that's what allows you to do other things as well in terms of that. So you were referring to 2 other partners. Are all 3 of you financial advisors? So if you talk about splitting it between the financial advisors, is it the 3 of you, or are there more advisors in the practice than just the 3 of you?
Francois, there's 4 advisors apart from myself in the practice, 2 of which work together with me in a team where we do the profit splits. The other 2 advisors in the practice have a separate function in the practice, so we made a conscious decision to keep them still as part of the practice, but on a separate payment system.
They're not part of the partnership structure, sort of. They are in the business, and obviously, as you said, they are remunerated differently. But between the 3 main partners in the business, and it's nice that you talk about partners, because if you think a lot of people will start with, let's say, like an Old Mutual, and they just see their little thing as their practice. But you are actually building a bigger business by partnering, collaborating with other that has the same vision, the same outlook, and the same values as what you've got. Did you start it initially, or did you join this practice, or how did it start?
No, I was the first person in the practice, obviously, but then after a while, we had the opportunity to get in another advisor, and then to hire some support staff within the practice. And we only employed the last person last year when he finished university, but also a fantastic guy, and we're really not actively recruiting, but when the right person crosses our path, we try to make them a good offer.
And I think it was one of the things that caught my attention last year when I visited Kimberley, is like you're building this bigger practice and you are very clear on what's important to you. From my perspective anyway, you are very clear on how you want to do things and what is important to you. But then on the other hand, you're also very open to learn and to see what else is possible and to gauge whether you are doing the right things or are you doing things as well as you possibly could. Am I right in that observation?
Yes, Francois, because I think when I started as a financial advisor, I had this foolish notion that you're going to put in the work, get the practice good up and running, and then the work's going to be done and it's going to be smooth sailing. But as I've learned through time, is that I don't think the building of the practice and the improvement of processes and especially learning within the practice and from other people will ever be done.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. And just as you think then it's like what life do. You just start over every now and then, or it just brings you a little bit down and say, just remember, there's still a way to go. Then you started at the age of 24. What did you do before actually joining the industry? That's the first question. The second question is, what made you join the industry?
Before I joined the industry, I was still busy studying. When I was out of university, I was living with my parents. I was fortunate enough that I grew up in a household where my father involved us in the meetings with his auditor or his advisor, and when he had his annual review in that year, I sat in the meeting, and then I was immediately attracted to the business and I started asking questions, and I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to start working in the industry with a fantastic group of people.
It's always interesting for me to hear how people have ended up in this industry, and we've spoken about it in a number of episodes already, that it's very rare for somebody to say, I'm attracted to this, let me join. It's usually a friend or somebody or a very ambitious recruiter that would lure people to the industry. It's not people's first choice to join financial services. And when they do join, especially if they're a bit older, you will often hear them say, I should have done this a long time ago. So you were fortunate enough to, number one, figure out that this is something that you are attracted to and that you would love to do, and to start doing it at I would say the tender age of 24, because we think we're big at 24 and adults, but it's actually, one is very young at the age of 24. And I guess that getting into this whole thing has been hard. It's not easy starting off at 24.
Yes, I think like most people that come on your show or has been working as an advisor for more than 5 years have some story where they gotten through a couple of months where they weren't paid. And I think we could do better to make the industry more accessible to new people and to find ways to make it more attractive to people coming out of university.
So I want to jump to the Financial Planning Institute's Financial Plan of the Year. I don't want to call it a competition because that I think it shouldn't be called a competition, but I do think that it is something that a lot more advisors or financial planners should consider participating in. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to, gauge yourself against others and just to learn from that process, even if you don't even make any top anything. Just the process of going through this and being interrogated about what you're doing in your business. And look, I mean, I'm also of the opinion not everybody's got the answer and not everybody's like, this is the way to do it, Henry. So this is why you were top 5 and not top 1 or whatever. It is something for people to learn from and to say, well, I went through that, had the experience, and I'm better off for it. Now, I'm keen to hear what your experience was, no holds barred. Like, what was your experience going through this? One, why did you enter?
Yes, it's actually, me and a couple of my colleagues tried to figure out what's this competition about, what's important, what's being measured. And I realized at some point that very few people knew how it worked. And I said, okay, rather than spending 5 years trying to figure out exactly how to get the practice right, just enter and see how it goes. And then it was, as you said, an excellent way to just gauge where the practice is. And even though we only ended in the top 5, it was still for me a valuable learning opportunity, and it showed me where there's room for improvement in the practice.
It's very interesting to me how you say we, although we ended up in it's amazing. So you see this as a team effort and not as a Henry effort.
Yes, Francois, it's definitely a team effort, and as I mentioned, that's why I can sit here today knowing that our practice is still running, and even the client that's looking for us today or for me today is as a help at the office.
We can't do everything alone, and you can only go so far alone. But if you've got a team of people that you get along well with and that you gel with and that really believe in the mission, I think you can go very far. So how long have you been practicing by the time that so you said you joined when you were 24. So which year was that?
I joined Old Mutual in 2011. I was at an independent practice from 2009 up to 2011. You
started in 2009, and then you entered in 2018, am I right?
Yes.
So you've been practicing for quite a while. I mean, that is 2009. It's like 9 years before you entered, or call it in 8 years. By the time that you entered, I mean, you've learned a lot in that process. As you said, you've been working with wonderful people that's been helping you, and you've learned a lot. When you now entered, what is the process? How does this competition work? What are the things that they look at? What is important? And as you said, a lot of people don't know. So you said, let me just go and see what it's about. So let's help people and tell them what to expect. What is this competition about? What are the things that they're looking at, and so forth?
The first round consists of submitting a client file that you can prepare beforehand. The FPI gives you quite clear guidelines on what the file should look like. But I think it's important that rather than just window dressing and creating a file that you think they want, is to create a process within your practice that can really add value to a client and that can deliver on the same product every time. And then the second round is an audit where 3 auditors come to your practice and look from where you are operationally, ethically, legally. They benchmark you against industry standards, and then they also check whether the file you submitted is the standard for the practice. I think that's why before you enter the first file is to make sure your processes are aligned to give that every time.
So those are the first two sort of stages or phases of this competition. And then what happens after that? So now you've presented your files, they checked it, they came, they did the audit, they looked at the processes. Is this what you're really doing, or did you just window dress? And do they then decide on the top 3 based on that, or what happens? What happens from there?
Yes, that after the audit, they send you a report and says what went well, what didn't go well, and after that they select the top 3. After that I can't tell you what happened. Maybe another time.
Hopefully next time, because I hope that you'll enter again, because I think you learn in the process. And I mean, even if you look at Janet, who won in that year, I think she's been part of this competition for a number of years, where she's entered, etc. I'm sure it's not her first year. And I know of a number of people where they've entered and they top 3, top 5, or they come second, etc. And they keep on doing it because every time they learn something. And that was something I did want to ask, but you already said now that they do provide you with feedback, because I think there's a lost opportunity if you did not receive feedback from the FPI to know about where, because that's a lot like exams. You go write an exam, but nobody ever tells you where you went wrong and where you need to improve and what you need to pay attention to. The kind of feedback that you got, was it valuable?
Yes, it was mostly positive. I think even just the people entering that competition usually has a lot of the stuff figured out. To see that our practice did a lot of the things right was very reassuring, but it was also very interesting to see where there is areas for improvement.
Yeah, which I guess is where the value sits. And we will also be talking to Louis van der Merwe, he was also part of your, was it this year? So Louis van der Merwe, I think he was top 3 this year, if I'm not mistaken. Because I know I had 2 people that we work with a lot. It was you and Louis, who was top 5. Louis is down in Cape Town, so he also agreed to be a guest on this. So I'll find out from him what happens after this. Is there anything else in terms of the Financial Plan of the Year competition that you think can be valuable for people listening? And just sitting on that line, should I or shouldn't I? Do I really want to go through this process? Is it really worth my while? I guess the reason for entering is very important when you do decide to do this.
Yes, Fraser. For me, the reason for entering was purely to look at where we stand and how it works. And so it was more out of curiosity than I really did not have an expectation to win. But I think it's a good exercise for anyone to see where your practice stands. And I think with the information we got out of that is really valuable, and you can start working in the right direction.
One other question about the Financial Plan of the Year competition. How much time did you need to invest into the process?
Initially, it was a lot of work, but a lot more than I realized at the time. But since that process, it sent me on an interesting journey that now I spend up to 3 or 4 hours a week on the practice. I'm trying to my goal is to put a day aside just to work on the practice and practice structure rather than engage with clients, because the unfortunate part of learning what you don't know is the more you learn, the more you realize that you do not know.
I think that is one of the best moments you can have, is that moment when you realize what you don't know. Because you don't, and I've said this also in a couple of episodes, you don't know what you don't know, and therefore you don't know. Becoming aware of that, because it's all about awareness. The more you can be aware of, oh, okay, so we've been doing it this, but I never even thought of this, or I never even knew I should look at this. And I think that's where the value lies in these things, being challenged about the way that we do things. A role that I play a lot in what I do, specifically the consultant part of it, is to really challenge people in what they are doing and the way that they are doing it. I play that role of devil's advocate because nobody else does. When it's your business and your practice, you do the things in this, yes, boss, thank you, boss. And that's what they do usually. It's not all practices that are open to input and that kind of thing. And it's also dangerous, or difficult rather, not dangerous, but difficult, where if you allow too much input also, then everybody wants their piece and nothing gets done as well. So somebody still needs to make the ultimate decision. But nobody ever challenges. Not everybody's got that, let me challenge this. And I think entering for something like this, you are being challenged, whether you like it or not. So especially if you don't like being challenged, I think you should enter this kind of competition. Do you agree?
Yes, Frans, I think, anything that creates a better outcome for the client, I think is very valuable to any practice. And by looking at your practice and where you can improve your practice and what you are delivering to clients is always a positive outcome.
So that's the Financial Plan of the Year competition and the experience that you've had, will you enter again?
Not this year, but I think in the future I might enter again.
Awesome. I am so happy to hear that. Let's get a little bit back to the practice. And I want to talk, because you are situated in Kimberley. If we look at your client base in the practice, so not just Henry's, but the practice's client base, are they all over South Africa? Are the bulk of them situated in Kimberley and the surrounds? Where do you do most of your business, or where do most of your clients sit?
Yes, Francis, most of our clients sit in the area between Kimberley and Postmasburg, and we try to focus all our efforts on getting new clients in that area. But as we get referrals, or if somebody retires and he moves to the ocean, to the beach, it becomes a situation where there is some clients all over the country. But fortunately, we're living in an age where technology is on our side, and you can maintain a relationship with anyone at any place.
So what are the tactics that you're using to, you say you're actively looking for clients in the area, Kimberley to Postmasburg. How do you go about that? Is it mainly referrals, asking for referrals, or are you employing other strategies to try and attract the right client?
A lot of the new clients we get comes from referrals, but we don't really ask for referrals. We just go into a direction to rather position our value proposition to the client to make sure they understand it and can articulate it to a friend or a family member. And a part of our value proposition is that we can be a soundboard for a family member or anyone that the client refers to us, even if it's not a client. If someone, for instance, has a child that's looking to buy a house and they want to do a calculation on what the fees on the bond is or whatever the case may be, we'll do that for the client. And by doing that, you're already engaging with the inner circle of that client. And that's been, for us, I think, the best drive to expand our client base.
So just educating your clients on what it is you do, the value you offer, and then how they can relate. So that's Pareto, right? That's the Pareto. It's one of the principles that they employ. So Duncan McPherson, I know that a lot of people know him, but I know that you employ those processes and the way that they do things and the way that he says that things can be done. Is that what you based it on?
Yes, we've been fortunate enough to have the Pareto system available to us, and a lot of the strategies we employ in our practice comes out of that system.
And the results that you've seen, could you see like a big difference in the results before, like if you compare what you did before to now? How long have you been implementing it? I think we just need to know that. But then, are you seeing a difference? Is it working?
We've been implementing it incrementally over the past 2 years. We've definitely seen an improvement, maybe not in the number of referrals we get, but definitely in the quality of referrals we get. And for us, it's very important that the client understands what we're doing and who we're doing it for, so that he can, if he meets this guy, he says, listen, this is the people you should talk to, and that he realizes this guy is a good fit for the practice or might not be a good fit for the practice.
I had a bit of an agenda asking that question, and it's not whether Pareto is working or not. That was not the agenda. The agenda, why did I ask that question, is that is the difference between somebody saying, well, this works, and not it doesn't work, is that you are implementing it, you're executing, you're doing it, versus other people hearing it. It sounds fantastic, but they never do anything with it. And I know within the group there are people who are not implementing Pareto, and they have this at their disposal. It's very interesting and very exciting, and they want to do it, but they're not getting to doing it. So, and that's the difference. That's why I'm asking, is that, you learn these things and people teach you these things, and if you implement it, you start to see results. And one quality referral is much better than 10 names, which is also a referral, but it's not qualified, and therefore not of good quality. So I think from that point, I wanted to drive that point home to say, implementation and execution, whether it's perfect or not, is a lot better than just knowing about something. And that's something it seems that you are very good at doing. It's like when you like something, you actually implement.
I think there's a big misconception is that we did everything at once, but we do little incremental changes that just compound over time and then eventually produce good results. And everybody looks at the results, but it's not really this massive effort that went in all at once. I think the easiest comparison is if you want to lose weight, it won't help to exercise for 24 hours at once, but if you do 20 minutes at a time for a couple of weeks, you'll start seeing results. So rather focus on making small, sustainable changes than trying to put in this massive effort that's taking the wind out of your wings and leaving you actually in a worse place than you would have been if you never started.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very wise advice. In all of this process, so the referrals are a big part of your strategy to grow and to obtain or attract new clients. Do you also use social media at this point in time? Is that part of your strategy, or what other strategies are you using to attract clients apart from the referral, which is a big part of it?
As you know, I'm not the biggest fan of social media. I do not have a Facebook or a Twitter account. For me, it was not a professional reason, but rather that a personal reason that I do not believe the distraction it causes is worth the gains. But over time and with a lot of engagement with different people, including yourself, I realized that it is unfortunately or fortunately something you have to look at into the future. So what we are planning to do is to move into a more active presence on social media, but rather than trying to do it myself, we will hire someone that knows how to do it and enjoys.
So on that, you're talking about social media, and maybe I'm jumping a little bit way ahead now. So we've spoken about what are you doing to attract clients and those kind of things, and that referrals are important, but that you are coaching clients to actually what type of other clients should they refer, when should they refer somebody to you. And then looking a little bit at social media and that, do you do any like client appreciation events or any events in that sense? Or is that about the scope of your client attraction processes or efforts?
We have a client appreciation event, and there is a few community events we are involved in. We chose to rather go big in one or two events than have an event every other week. But yes, I think it's very important to give back to in any community that's being good to you and to your people. Is if you're not giving back, I think it's in a way it's selfish.
So, quick question then before I jump that gun where I wanted to jump to, which of these three things is the most valuable in terms of client attraction? Is it the referrals, the social media stuff, but then you're just starting to dabble in it, and then the events? Which one is more successful in that way?
I think the main focus in our practice to attract new clients is at this point definitely coaching the clients to give us the correct referrals. But yeah, as I said, I think that was one of the areas I have to improve on, and I should not make bad decisions because of my own views.
Yeah, that's true. You've touched on such an important thing. We must be very careful not to, and even when it comes to investments, if you are very risk averse, it shouldn't mean that you should be investing your clients into risk averse kind of funds if they actually need to be in more risky kind of investments, for example. And it's the same with market, that we shouldn't have our own beliefs about things in our personal life influence what may be good for our practices or our business. And we must be big enough almost to say, well, I acknowledge that and I can make a plan. I don't have to do things myself, but I can outsource or I can employ or whatever somebody in order to do that for me, because I just don't like being on my phone, as a simple example now.
Yes, I think it's very important for anyone in any business to find out what is it that you are good at, because then you will enjoy it more and it will be easier to do. Especially in our practice, we realized one of the advisors hates getting new clients or engaging with groups, but he's magnificent at implementing systems and getting a lot of work done a lot faster than other people. So we realized, why do we want to punish this guy by putting him there? Rather put the people that enjoy engaging with new clients there and take the burden of the systems away from them. We should not have a team that everyone does the same thing, but rather a team that complements each other.
And we read all of these things, and we listen to, and we go to talks, and we attend workshops where they teach us this and they share this with us. But when it comes to implementation or to the practical side, we sometimes easily forget these things. It's hard to remind ourselves, like, let's allow people to do what they like and what they're good at, instead of trying to get them to better the things that they're not good at. Because we, like a lot in a SWOT analysis, you would go, your strengths is this, and then your weaknesses are, so your weaknesses are your development areas, rather than focusing on what you're really good at and make you even better at that. It's something that I learned in 2015 when I went through my process of figuring out what is it that I'm supposed to do. That why don't I just focus on the things that come naturally to me, rather than trying to be good at something that I don't like, or something, even though it may mean more money, or even though it may mean something else to me. It's just focusing on getting better at what it is that I do. It actually makes it so much more fun, and I just enjoy it so much more. And I think that is what we must always remind ourselves of in terms of that. So let me now jump finally to that thing that I wanted to jump to, and that's the technology that you are using in your business. I'm fortunate to work with Old Mutual and PFA specifically often, in terms of they use Xplan. They've implemented Xplan. It's been a fantastic implementation, although I guess there's always a user or three that will not agree with my statements. But I've seen Xplan being used in different businesses, and I think the way that Old Mutual is doing it is fantastic. They've really done it. You are one of those people that have really embraced Xplan.
Yes, Franco. Xplan is a magnificent platform, and a lot of the people do not realize the power that is in that platform. I think even though we are using it a lot, I think there's still so much we can learn, especially when we are collecting data and do analysis of how the clients want to be engaged and when is the best time to engage them. I think there's a big leap that must come from the industry to rather embrace technology than see it as an opponent.
Yeah, and again, it's like, I'm not a technology person. I am, how do we say in Afrikaans, ek is technologies gestremd. So I'm a little bit, from a technology point of view, I stayed behind when the first computer came with Bill Gates. I never moved on, so therefore now I can't do it. And it starts with that, your own attitude towards that. And you're young, so you won't know what I'm talking about. But there are older people listening to this, people that's been around for longer where, and I had it. We had a session now on the 10th of April, or the 10th of May rather, where I spoke about employing technology. And there were people there that's still running their practices of diaries and books. They've got no computer systems, no nothing. They're running a fantastic practice, a successful practice. They know exactly what's going on, but everything's still manual. And you could see when we were speaking about technology, they are open to this. But you also had the choice not to be open to what is possible, because it does get more difficult as we move through with all the compliance and everything that needs to happen. And I think being open to technology and being open to learn and to go through that pains of that learning curve it's worth it in the end. And I think it's critical for us to look at it that way.
Yes, Franco, but I think it's also it's easy for me to criticize someone not embracing a technology, but I think it's very difficult to move from where the industry was 30 years ago then to where it is now. So I chose to embrace it, but there's a lot of cases where I understand that the people are a bit reluctant to do it.
Yeah, but I think it's for somebody to make it less scary, because I just think it's a fear thing. I know things are working now. I want to change it, and suddenly it's not. It's everything may fall apart, and it's not. And I don't want to risk that. But technology can really be your friend if you do it right. So in terms of Xplan, so Xplan has got two very specific sort of, I would say, if I look at it from a practice point of view, two very distinct functions. On the one hand, the CRM, which I include the compliance and all the processes into that, and on the other hand, the planning tools. On the CRM side, or what we term client focus, which of those are most valuable currently for you in your practice, of everything that this system can do, because they can do a lot? What has been the thing that having the the biggest impact in a positive way in your practice?
The way Xplan is built, you can build a lot of standardized processes into Xplan, and that has enabled us in our practice to give the client a uniform experience regardless of who deals with the query or task, as they call it in Xplan. So that you can create threads within Xplan and you can populate that with the necessary information so that there's basically a step-by-step guide within the program that anyone that logs in can follow. Our idea when we started building everything on Xplan was that one advisor can get up in the middle of the meeting with the client and leave, and the other advisor must be able to come sit there and know exactly what's going on and finish up the meeting.
That is crucial. And there's two things. So there's the advice side, as you said. So the one advisor stops, the other one takes over, and they just continue because they know exactly where you were. But also when somebody in your admin team leaves, getting a new person in, if they can read, they can go very far without you having to sit next to them and spend time with them, simply if they can read, because this is already step by step. As you said, it's standardized. Everything is there. That is something I've been preaching on and on and on about in many of my sessions, is to say, like, automation is one thing. I mean, that's the one thing that you do via these tasks. You're automating a lot of the stuff. I don't have to type in everything every time because it's already there. But then also just having a standard process that somebody could come in and follow as long as they can read. Is that your experience?
Yes. We had a case earlier this year where we were forced to build better processes because one of the staff members was absent or in hospital for longer than we expected, and because of the specialized knowledge that she had, we had to start building processes that the other staff members can follow and not make mistakes on the tasks. I think the best way to take the fear out of automation for somebody is what one of the engineers in the robotics lab at Old Mutual told me, is they don't want to replace the human, they just want to take the robot work out of the humans. And I think that's the whole idea behind automation and the artificial intelligence and the moving onto these different systems.
I love that. And that's why I think, this is not, automation is something that should make you better. It's not something that's necessarily replacing anything. It's this mundane stuff. In the session, there are a couple of things I said, the kind of tasks that you can look at when you are starting to look for opportunities for automation. So you start off with repetitive tasks. Then you look at expensive tasks. And then you look at time-consuming tasks. And you can go and identify the things there and say, well, let's just start small. A simple thing, every time you need to send an email to say, thank you for sending me this document, I'm sure you can standardize that and automate that so that you don't even have to reply to somebody who sends you something. It's simple things like that where you can start. So there's a whole host of things that one could use to do that. Yeah, it's just, I think it becomes very valuable. And this is something that Russell said in his episode, is that it's these small things. You think you save 30 seconds. It's not a big deal. But you save 30 seconds every hour, every day, every week, every month, and suddenly you add it up and you see how much time you've saved in a year. And that is what you said earlier as well, where you make these small incremental changes. Suddenly there's a big impact or a big return on those changes. But nobody really sees that you've been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years. They only see what's happening now, and they think that you did everything like it was one thing you did and it was a big change. And it's the same with things like automation as an example.
It's important to realize that it's a way to help us. So whatever is going to happen with technology is going to happen. So the choice we have at this point is to either embrace it or get left behind.
I mean, connectivity I'm not sure where you're from. It sounds like you're from a planet somewhere else. But I mean, in the Northern Cape, and that connectivity and those things, because I know that was a big challenge when I used to be in the Free State and that in the Platteland, or in the flatlands as I call them, is that still an issue, or is the connectivity and all of those kind of things? Because the cloud is the way to go. I mean, everything's synced, everything's centralized. You've got access from anywhere at any time. But a lot of people feel like, I don't have connectivity. It's a challenge. Do you find that is, especially if you leave Kimberley, you go more towards Postmasburg, does this become an issue?
Because I think you're not moving all over the province into the desert. You're moving between specific places, and that's why it's also important that you have the clients that come to your office rather than you going to the place wherever it may be, because at your office you can control the environment and you can get a nice fiber line there, and that is no issue like you when you were younger.
So on that point, what is the furthest that a client is driving to get to your office? And how many of your clients do you see at your office? But I'm interested to learn, like, which of your clients are driving the furthest just to come and see you at your office? What's the distance that they need to travel? The one that live the furthest from where you are.
I think it will be about 60, 70 Ks to our office, and then 60, 70 Ks back. Yeah, is the furthest, and considering it's on a dirt road, it's probably more like 100 Ks on a regular road.
As a percentage, how many of your clients are you seeing at your office?
There is still some clients that want us to meet them at their home, but we try to explain to the clients what the benefit is of coming into the office, and that we can really add a lot more value to them when we are in our own environment. But I think at this point it's about 90-95% of the clients come into the office on a weekly basis.
That's amazing. I fully believe that we should stop going to clients unless necessary, because there's a few things. As you said, you can control the environment. That's number one. The amount of time you save, and then you take them out of the environment where they are in charge, sort of, and you don't have control over what goes on, whether it's children running around and coming to interrupt the meeting, or whether you're at somebody's business and they've got their workers or their employees coming in and asking questions all the time, things like that. Or just simply that now you get there and there's not such good reception for your 3G or your 4G, LTE, whatever you're using. And it's just from that point of view, I think it's crucial if you want to up your client experience, if you want the client to go like, wow, I've never experienced this before. Wow, this is really professional. Wow, this is really making me feel different. Then we have to get them to come and see us at our offices. And I don't know, it's the same thing with charging fees. I'm not going to get into that today, but there are certain people that's just not comfortable discussing that with clients and getting them to pay fees. The same with coming to my office. I've always come to see you at your place. You're now changing that and saying, please come and visit me at my office because of X, Y, and Z. People find it difficult, and it's actually listening to you. I think it shouldn't be a difficult conversation.
No, I think when the client understands what the reasoning is, they usually don't mind doing it. If you just say, you must come to my office, they might object. But if you say, listen, come to my office, this is the reason why we want to do it, and this is how it will enhance your experience, and then I don't think anyone will mind. And I think just to touch on the fees, I think that's exactly the same. If you're not comfortable charging a fee, you should go maybe look at why not. Because if you can articulate the value the client is getting for that fee, I think no sane person in the world will mind paying that fee.
Are we able to show them what we are actually doing? And it's way beyond the things that we should be getting paid for is way beyond, the kind of return that I gave you, because I didn't have control over that. It's all the other stuff. And it's just to actually know what are all these things that we're doing, and that adds value, that helps them, things that just makes them, I think, feel this whole feeling, emotional things, the status, all those things, I think for a client, those are the things that they're really getting and that really makes a difference. But even they don't know, and that's why you're saying is like, how do we articulate and explain and put it into words? Because that is not an easy task.
No, I think that is one of the most difficult things to do for any practice, and I think also one of the most important things to do, because the point when you realize what it is you are doing and why you are doing it, and you can explain it to someone else, and I think that's very powerful for any business. And if you can explain it in such a way that they can explain it to someone else, I think there is where the win is.
No, you're 100% right. So, Henry, then what does Henry do when Henry is not dispensing financial planning advice? What are you up to? What do you like to do in, I won't say your off time, but let's say your time away from the office? What do you like to do?
I really enjoy spending time at home. Fortunately, my wife enjoys going out and stuff, but if it's up to me, I would just spend time at home with my dogs and my wife. And we also love to travel. Interesting thing is that our goal is to visit 100 countries eventually.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's awesome. My wife and I, we had kids very, very early, so I had never had my youth went into my children, and so the youngest one is a matric, and we also said now we want to travel once she's out of the house as well. But I've got this dream of traveling and working from anywhere in the world, and hence why I'm building my business the way that I am doing it. Because I want to work while I'm there. I don't want to be spending my savings while I'm there. I don't want to live off my savings. I want to earn still while I'm there. And that's the dream. So I love this. I think I resonate with let's visit 100 countries. We were talking about it yesterday, getting a huge map of the world and then just putting up, the places we want to go. And then once you've gone there, you change it. So let's say all the things in yellow, for example, where you want to go. And once you've been there, you put a green thing in there so that you can see we've been there. I think it's a big thing. So which country is at the top of your list?
The one I enjoyed the most was Austria at this point. It was we were there over Christmas, and we enjoyed the Christmas markets and the New Year's festival. Yeah, it was a lovely time.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So how many countries have you visited of the 100 that you want to visit?
I think we're on 24 now.
Wow, okay. I'm a little bit behind. I'm on 0. I always joke, the only time I've been overseas is when you go to Cape Town, when we fly down, and you go over False Bay. That I've been over the sea there. So, but my time will come.
Depending on where you are in your life, everyone has something that's important to them, and a reason why you do it. It's personal reason and a professional reason. Personally, I think the goal is for everyone to build something that can take care of their family and provide for their family. And professionally, I think a lot of the people do not realize yet, especially the people starting out, they don't realize with what they are busy doing. Because if someone comes to you and you do a will for him and you do his financial planning for him and say implement life cover for him, that guy is basically saying to you, listen, if I'm not around anymore, I'm trusting you to take care of my family. You have the key to my family's wellness when I'm not there. And I don't think a lot of people realize what the implication is of that. You're not just implementing a product or giving advice. You really have an important role to play in the client's lives.
And this is going back to what Kobus Klein said. This is such a noble profession. It's not just a profession. It's not just a nice profession. It's a noble profession. And that's why I say we don't always, at the point when we do something, we don't really realize the impact it can have until something happens. That person retires and your plans actually fall in place, or somebody unfortunately passes away and everything is there, apart from all the heartache and the emotions and everything. The plans that you've put in place actually, is working and it's doing exactly what you foresee it would do or very close to that. And that is really, I think, where the satisfaction comes from. And what you're saying is that we've got such a big responsibility to do what we're doing, and we should stop being ashamed. A lot of people are ashamed to say, well, I'm in insurance. You should be very proud of it to say, whether you say you're in insurance or whether you say you're a financial planner or in financial services or whatever the case may be, is that be proud of what you do and really be grateful that we have this opportunity to have an impact on other people's lives.
Yeah, we have a magnificent opportunity to really make an impact. And even if a guy's just, let's not take an extreme example as somebody passing away. If somebody is trusting you to, say, save for his first home or vehicle or whatever, that guy is handing you one of his dreams and say, listen, I'm trusting you to take care of this dream. So it's really, however you look at it, it's really, as you said, a noble cause.
What is the ultimate dream for your practice? What are you working towards?
It might sound strange, but I'm hoping to build the practice in such a way that at some point I will no longer be needed there, so that the people in the practice is empowered enough so that they can do any function whether I'm there or not.
Yeah, that's also, and it's a simple goal, and it's not so simple to get there, but it's a simple goal, it's a clear goal, and say, well, this is what we want to do, and I get there. If Henry started today, this is my last question. If Henry started today, but let's say you're not 24 anymore. Let's say just you started today, you're brand new to the industry. Knowing what you know now, how would you approach that? If you're in your first year, what would you be focusing on, and what would you be doing?
I think my focus will be very similar to what my focus currently is to learn from people I think that know more than me. So for anybody starting, I think the best advice is to find somebody that you know you can trust and that has achieved what you want to achieve. Don't go ask your friend that started with you and is also struggling with you. Rather go to someone that has walked the walk and built a sustainable practice, and go ask them for advice. And don't go ask one person, go ask a lot of people, because you're not going to build your practice exactly the same as mine or the next guy's. But if you take little bits and pieces of everyone's ideas and how they are doing things, you can create a practice that's special and unique to yourself.
Yeah, that's great advice. Henry, thank you very much for being here. I really enjoyed the chat. I think I can go on for another hour. All I want to say is I like what you're doing. From the moment I met you, I thought that, this is something different. And I think what really got me, and I may have said it in the beginning, is that you're very serious about what you're doing. And you're proud of what you're doing, and you want to do it the right way. So for that, I want to say, well done. Keep it up. Don't change. Go after what you believe in the way that you feel that things must be done. And I wish you all the best. And I'm definitely keeping an eye on. And the next time you enter the Financial Plan of the Year, I'll be rooting for you once again.
Thank you for listening to Propulsion. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. This will help us tremendously. For more about Propulsion and other valuable information, please visit our website at propulsion.co.za.